Hello, Fear Seekers, and welcome back to the channel. Nature is supposed to be a place of tranquil serenity, and often that is exactly what you will find in it. But sometimes, through a combination of unluck and carelessness, one might encounter someone or something that they never could have imagined. Today, we're going to be diving into some disturbing, allegedly true, forest horror stories. Now, without further ado, sit back, ignore the feeling that you're being watched, and get ready to ferment your fears. The following is a story that took place quite a few years back now. However, it still baffles me completely, and I'd like to share it here. I'm a teenager, and I've been in scouting/Boy Scouts for nearly all my life, and I really enjoy exploring with my friends and being trusted more, as I'm older now. A few years ago, me and two girls named Amy and Harriet were asked to head into the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long, straight stick suitable for carving into a point. Bear in mind that I was a lot younger back then. Harriet was older and Amy only 1 year older than myself. We had been walking deliberately in the same direction as to not get lost, and memorizing the surroundings as we went, in order to find our way back easily. About 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around to return to the campsite. That's when the initial panic set in. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was non-existent in the first place. Like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one another appeared as all copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the correct direction, while shouting out for help, and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road, but very thin, separating the forest, splitting it into two. We didn't follow the road as it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like this was out here in these woods, so we just kept walking. We eventually came to a road we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple regatta outdoors coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite, as by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for an hour and a half. She said she'd never seen us before, but she said there's another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. We frantically apologized for being so long and because we couldn't find anything. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and he stated confusedly that we'd only been gone 25 minutes and that our free time was still going on. To this day, this baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long and our watches and phones had said we'd been gone for hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we'd entered an area that the concept of time didn't apply to. I believe in the paranormal. However, this was so unlike anything I've heard or experienced before. It literally was like we'd been in a time vortex or something, and that hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was very strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of the camp. Thanks for reading my story. It's a weird one, but it's true. I had a summer job when I was a 15-year-old girl that was a few miles from my house. I lived in a rural wooded area and my parents never let me go into the woods by myself. But they worked days and my job started at noon every day, so I had to walk to work. I chose to disobey them and walk through the woods instead of on the road to work, because it cut about a mile off of my walk. So every day, at the same time, I'd walk through the very much abandoned state forest down a deer path for a mile or so until it intercepted a railroad track. Then I'd walk a couple more miles down the railroad tracks into town to my job. Stupid, I know, but I was 15. Taking this path always freaked me out, and I always felt like I was being watched, but it was shorter and less sunny and less hot, and so I ignored my instincts, thinking my parents' influence was just making me paranoid. My parents would pick me up after my shift, unaware of my daily routine. This continued for weeks. One day, I'm walking, about a mile from any houses, deep in the woods, and there are 2 porno magazine pages that had been ripped out and placed on the trail facing me. They hadn't been there the day before. I was completely creeped out as they were clearly intentionally placed and probably for me since very few people utilize this area. But I kept walking because if I turned around at this point, I'd have further to go to get out of the woods, and then there was a huge hill to climb to get back to my house, and no one would be around there to help me anyway. This was a densely wooded area with brambles and dogwood and rolling hills, so I couldn't see very far in any direction. Suddenly, I could hear someone else walking close by. I stopped, and I would hear them for a split second, and then they would stop. They sounded like they had change in their pockets, so I knew it wasn't an animal, but because of the echo, I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Just to check that I wasn't crazy, I stopped once more and heard the same noise which quickly stopped when I stopped. That's when I knew I was being stalked. My heart was racing with fear and my vision went blurry, but my instincts told me not to speak and not to run, but just keep walking down the dense deer path further into the woods. My gut told me not to look behind me. I could sense there was someone right behind me on the deer path now, but I did not look back. Now, I'm a rather short, slightly chubby person. Always have been. And looking at me, you'd probably assume that I couldn't run very fast, so if you wanted to catch me deep in the woods, you might assume you had plenty of time to do so. And looking back, I think that is exactly what this creep was thinking. But back then, I ran cross-country and track and could run a 7-minute mile, and hills were my specialty. I always placed really well on hilly terrain. By no means was I a great runner, but certainly I was likely faster than whatever pedo creep was hanging out in the woods stalking a little girl. It's not that I was processing this thought at the time, I just instinctually knew not to run. Yet. I kept walking seemingly deeper into the woods because I knew the train track was up ahead where there would be more space to run without tripping or getting caught in the tree branches. It was terrifying to not look back, but something told me not to. While I walked, I felt like my entire body was shutting down. It's a feeling I've never felt before or after that day. It was the feeling of being prey. Everything went blurry and I could feel blood pulsing in my ears and my heart was pounding. I just kept walking like nothing was happening and did not turn around, but I could feel someone maybe 5 or 10 feet behind me at this point, following me for a good 1/8 of a mile. I didn't turn around. I didn't scream because I knew no one would hear me. As soon as I got nearer the train tracks, which were elevated along a man-made gravel mound, I ran. And then I ran on all fours up the hill, gripping onto weeds to pull myself up faster. and then I sprinted along the tracks as fast as my lungs and legs could carry me. I heard and saw branches snapping below me in the woods, but now I was out in the sun and the woods were dark, so I couldn't see what was behind the branches. I just kept sprinting. I never even saw the person, but I knew their intentions were awful. I never cut through the woods again, and I didn't mention what happened to my parents until I was 18 and had already moved out of the house. I was too afraid of being grounded. How many of you have an event from your past that you can't ever forget? Something that terrified you to the point of pure primal fear, but is so far-fetched and impossible that you begin questioning your own mind's credibility. For me, that event happened 10 years ago, in the woods of Somerset. I was about 15 when these events took place. I'm not going to lie, I consumed a lot of horror media growing up. I would stay up all night watching Nightmare on Elm Street. Yes, even the crappy last 3 movies. Yes, they sucked, don't at me. I absolutely adored all types of horror media, and so did my friends. One type of horror that always struck a chord with us were the investigation shows. Ghost Hunters, Destination Truth, Scariest Places on Earth, etc. I remembered my friend Mark's dad was real big into paranormal investigation, and that kind of fueled the flames. We all wanted to grow up and explore the world, investigating all kinds of abandoned buildings hiding unknown creatures or entities. We would be better than all of those shows because unlike them, when shit hit the fan, we would stand our ground and take on whatever came our way. But the worldwide adventure would have to be on hold considering, we were literal children. That never broke our resolve though. Now, Mark's dad had the works. EMF detectors, night vision cameras with thermal readings, high-end audio recorders, all of it. He also had several firearms. Not like a crazy amount, but enough for personal protection and home defense. We all referred to Mark's dad as the Batman of ghost hunting because he always seemed to have the right tool for every situation. He even had one of the magazines for his pistol loaded with silver bullets. Just in case, he told us. He would take us out along a lot of his investigations to local cemeteries and places with a haunted reputation. We all felt like we were really doing it. This was just a stepping stone for our lives to become the adventure book we all thought it was going to be. Sorry for all the background for the event, but I just want you all to understand the mindset we were all in to get us to make the stupid choices that we did. Now, Mark's place was the place to be back then. We would spend days at his place hanging out, playing games, and watching TV to our heart's desire. One of the weekends we had the house to ourselves, and it was great. It was Mark, Chuck, Danny, Brendan, and myself. We were trying to kill as much time as we could waiting for night to fall. You see, one of the most beautiful things about Somerset were the woods. Somerset did have a little center town where it faked a sense of being an actual city. But once you got out of the 2 miles worth of city, you all of a sudden dropped off the face of the world. Somerset is about 11 square miles large, and I guarantee you that most of that is woods. Some of it is Lake Cumberland, but most of it is woods. When we were at Mark's place, we were about 20 minutes from the next house. Like I said, dropped off the face of the world. 10 years ago, the night finally fell over Somerset. This was finally our time. Our stupid, edgy, 15-year-old time. We had been waiting for night to come because we were going to go explore the woods out behind Mark's house. We were all armed with our flashlights, water bottles, and all of us had knives of some capacity. Mark had also brought some of his guns, just in case. He had a 12-gauge pump shotgun. It maybe had 6 shells in the gun at best. Chuck had a .22 rifle that had a very wimpy single-round capacity, and I had a .22 6-shot revolver. In Somerset, being the backwoods town that it wasn't uncommon to see someone toting around firearms all over the place. Now, it wasn't super common to have 15-year-olds carrying guns, but it would happen from time to time. Plus, we were on private property, so in our minds, it was okay. Like I said, we were stupid kids. Once we were all geared up, it was time for our adventure. As soon as we entered the woods, there was an uneasy tension in the air. The crickets and other wildlife in the area sounded active, which was a good sign. We weren't sure just yet as to what it was that made us feel off, but we would soon find out. We were about 15 minutes in when we found the bridge. This bridge was an old rickety wooden thing that went across a steep trench that was probably about 15 feet deep, that went on for at least 50 to 70 feet before twisting around the hills out of sight. Not exactly a canyon, but it was definitely not something we wanted to go down into. If we did, it would be a pain in the ass to get back up. We decided to take a quick break while we were there. We set up a small perimeter with a lantern from our pack. We really didn't have any plan on just how long we were going to be out there, so we decided to set up a small campfire and just hang out until it was time to continue. Chuck, Danny, Mark, and Brendan were relaxing and shooting the shit with each other, so I decided to keep watch. I was walking around the perimeter we had set up, shining my flashlight around the woods surrounding us. As I was walking, I noticed something strange. I heard the crunching of the leaves under my feet, and I'm sure someone would say, "So what?" But that's just it. That's all I heard. Other than the few words here and there from my friends, I heard nothing else. The woods were dead silent. As soon as I noticed the silence, I drew the revolver from its holster, for whatever good the .22 was going to do to what I thought was nearby. I continued to shine my flashlight around, trying to remain calm, but then the beam shined onto something just at the edge of the hill. Something just barely peeking over the edge of the trench. Something that I couldn't quite make out with just the light. But after a few moments of adjusting, I finally could make out what it was, but I wished that I hadn't. The thing's white skin was reflecting the beam from the flashlight, but I could make out a vaguely human-shaped head. Its dark eyes seemed to absorb the light, leaving just soulless voids staring daggers at me. I was frozen in place, locked in eye contact with this creature. Then its head disappeared back into the trench. As soon as I was released from its gaze, I turned back to my friends and tried as quietly as I could to get their attention, but they didn't seem to notice me. They were too enveloped in conversation, probably about something stupid as usual. So after mustering as much sound as I could, I called out, "Hey!" The crack of my voice echoed through the now silent woods. They all whipped their heads back to me, startled by the sudden sound. After a moment, I finally recollected myself and slowly but frantically pointed out to the trench where I saw the thing. "There's something in the ditch," I barely forced out. With that, the rest of my friends quickly got up and drew what weapons they had. All of us frantically searching the edge of the ditch with our guns trained on the spot. After a few moments of our desperate searching, we finally noticed the thing peek up again, about 10 feet closer than it had previously been. It was peeking out just slightly more than it was previously. My friends were now caught in the same trance as its voids of eyes stared quickly, moving from one of us to the other. For a moment, it almost looked like it didn't have a mouth. Then we all saw its tongue come out of a slit in its face, almost seeming to lick its lips at us. We all stood in that same frozen shock as the thing quickly dipped back down into the trench. It came back up again another 10 feet closer. It was coming closer to us. I can't remember who yelled to run, but I remember us all running like maniacs back towards Mark's house. So much for standing our ground. I found myself close to the front, right behind Chuck. We ran for what felt like forever. As we ran for what we believed was our lives, I heard Danny and Brendan screaming. I can't remember what it was that they were saying. My ears were ringing and my lungs were burning. Then we finally made it back to Mark's house. Seeing his house was the closest feeling to salvation I've ever experienced. We all practically dived into the door, quickly locking it behind us. After we were finally clear, we all kept our guns trained on the doors and exits fueled only by adrenaline. It had to have been hours that we all stood with our weapons in our hands, just hoping that the creature wouldn't try to enter the house. Once morning finally came, we were all exhausted. I don't think I was the first person to pass out, but I know I was the last person to wake up. Everyone else was sitting quietly in the living room. It took hours before we decided to talk about what had happened. Danny and Brendan explained that as we were running, they could hear heavy steps running behind them. We couldn't rationalize what it was that we saw, so we all decided to not talk about it to anyone else. Again, stupid decision, I know, but we were terrified teenagers. We also decided that we were never going out into the woods behind Mark's house again. I never did go back out to those woods, and our investigation team plans unfortunately fell apart. We all moved to different places later in our life and slowly grew apart. The only people I really keep in contact with anymore are Chuck and Mark, but I haven't seen either of them in years. There are many things that I question when I look back at that night. What could it have been? Why couldn't we move? Was it just some animal that looked monstrous in the light? But the thing that always confuses me is how it moved. It just kept bobbing up and down out of a 5-foot trench. I don't know how it could have kept climbing up and down. Unless it was just ducking. Hey guys, glad to see you made it to the end of the video. Have you ever had any strange or mysterious encounters in the forest? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. If you wish to reach out with suggestions, feedback, stories, or just want to say hello and become part of a growing community, check out the links in the description. We're still in the early days, and most of these have just recently been set up, but it would be great to see you there. Alright guys, that just about wraps up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So long, Fear Seekers. I'll see you in the next video.
She's not dead.